Hello, good afternoon and to everybody, to all the attendees, and welcome to this session of the R&I Days on transformative research and innovation policy post-COVID-19. It's a pleasure to be able to address such a distinguished audience in this fantastic event and bring some of the ideas that the ESIR group, of which I'm a member. You will see more members coming in a few minutes, which that the ESIR group has been preparing, has been discussing over the past months. The ESIR group is a group of advisors to the European Commission Director General for Research and Innovation. We are 15 people from different disciplines that advise in particular on how research and innovation can enable transformation and can really bring about positive impacts, economic and societal and environmental impacts through research and innovation. So over the past months, already in the last year's Research and Innovation Days, we had presented during the early days of the pandemic period our vision on how to really mix measures aimed at protecting the economy and society with preparedness measures, and in particular transformational measures. And this protect, prepare, transform policy mix has also been incorporated in the overall vision of the European Commission over the past year. Now, since then, we have been working on how to deepen our thinking and the advice we provide to EU institutions in a number of domains, but in particular, focusing on how innovation and industrial transformation can really help the EU build back better, right? So in really developing our thinking, we also have come across the internal reflections of the European Commission in DG Research and Innovation on the role of the future vision for industry that they are developing, the so-called Industry 5.0. And this vision, Industry 5.0, is built upon a human-centric approach to industry and industrial transformation, and in particular to technology, as you can imagine. It's also oriented towards resilience, so really enabling Europe as a system, but also industrial value chains to thrive also despite adversity and to really absorb shocks in the future. And this also really incorporates some of the concepts that are being developed at the EU level in public policy, such as, for example, strategic autonomy or digital sovereignty, and with all the caveats and the qualifications that will be given during today's session, not only human-centric and resilient, but also particularly sustainable. So the industry of the future should be sustainable from an economic, social, and environmental perspective. So how do we bring about this change? And if there are ideas around of entrepreneurs or industries of whole value chains that can massively contribute to building back much better compared to even the pre-pandemic situation, and really restore a path to sustainable development and resilience at the EU level, well, how do we encourage these ideas? How do we build the framework conditions to make them implementable and eventually realized? This is what we want to discuss today. We have three fantastic speakers with us. So in principle, we have one guest and two colleagues, members of ESIR you will hear from. They will take the floor in the following order. We will start with Niklas Johansson, who's a Senior Vice President of Communication and Climate at LKAB. And Niklas will tell us about a plan that LKAB has to really revolutionize the whole value chain in which it operates. You will hear from him in 1 minute. And then you will hear from Daria Isaacson, who is a Director General at Vinnova, who's also a member of the ESIR group. Hello, Daria. Thanks for being with us. And then you will also hear from Andrew Morlett, who is the Chief Executive of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and his mission is chiefly that of really accelerate the transition to the circular economy. So they will really illustrate what change means in practice and how we can also build policies that help us achieve change over time. While you hear these presentations, you'll be able to use Slido in order to ask questions. So make sure that you start, while you listen to these presentations, you start thinking about the questions you want to ask, and you use the Slido channel in order to have these questions be conveyed to me as a moderator, and so that I can ask these questions when the 3 presentations will be over. This session is also, if you wish, the second episode of a series or of a saga, because a few weeks ago in ESIR, we also already had a first conversation with an entrepreneur, Emmanuel Faber from Danone, who illustrated the difficulties of bringing about change in a large corporations, especially when industry leaders want to massively shift towards a more sustainability-oriented business model. Now, today we hear from Niklas Johansson what his business plan is at LKAB, and what's the transformation that LKAB is trying to achieve will mean in practice, also in terms of impact. So without further ado, I give the floor to Niklas, thanking him very much. Thank you, Niklas, for being with us today. And the floor is yours for an illustration of this vision that we all found to be very attractive and exciting. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Andrea, and I'm extremely happy to be here. I'm trying to find the presentation. It's not loaded yet. Is that right?
It's not on screen yet, so it should be loaded.
Should be coming. But basically, LKAB is Europe's leading mining and mineral group. And I should say that what's important for this session is let's see. Yes, now we're there.
Now you're on.
So basically, important for this is to know that we mine about 80% of all the iron ore mined in the European Union. And as you know, iron ore is primarily used to make steel. So we're part of the whole steel industry value chain, and the climate impact of the steel industry that need to be changed. And to simplify it, iron ore is a combination of iron and oxygen, and to make steel you have to get rid of the oxygen. And the blast furnace process of the steel industry today uses coal, and the coal combines with the oxygen to form carbon dioxide. And what we've embarked upon a few years ago, together with our partners in the hybrid project, steelmaker SSAB and energy company Vattenfall, is the hybrid project, where we take green hydrogen, inject that into this in order to get rid of the oxygen, and basically make sponge iron, which is pure iron, in order for the steel industry to be able to transform and get rid of the carbon dioxide emissions in this. Just earlier this week, we announced that we have in our pilot plant been able to continuously and with stability produced green hydrogen reduced iron ore to sponge iron. So saying that we are now very confident in the technology for this going forward. And last year, LKAB announced our new business strategy, which will take us from being a producer of iron ore and iron ore pellets using green hydrogen and this technology in order to produce sponge iron, carbon dioxide free, and to be able to provide to our customers in the steel industry, primarily in Europe, this opportunity to reduce emissions. And when you put the scale of that with us mining 80% of the iron ore in the European Union, it gets huge. When we have made this whole transformation of all our production, we will be saving 35 million tons of carbon dioxide emissions in the steel industry, our customers. That amounts to about 2/3 of the total emissions of Sweden. And as I told you before, this is a business strategy, and it's based on a few things that I think is important to realize. Yes, we take a bet on a price on carbon, realizing both from the market conditions, what we see on the market, but also on the policy side, where the kind of forecast we have for the price of carbon in Europe, we see this as viable going forward. The other thing is, of course, scale, and that happens in all industry. When you introduce scale into things, things start happening on the cost side, which is very important to the economic viability of such a project. But this is a business strategy where we see this will strengthen our competitiveness going forward. Another thing with scale is that it also brings about opportunities, especially when you apply a circular approach to this. And that's what we've done when it comes to the waste from our iron ore business, where we have a lot of mine waste today, and seeing that we can form a new industry out of this with a circular approach and bring forward new products and large volumes of new products that would not be viable if you would look at them separately. Seeing that we can take forward and bring forward 5 times Sweden's need of phosphorus for mineral fertilizers, cadmium-free, fossil-free, using green hydrogen again in this process. And we can take out 30% of EU's present need of rare earth elements out of what's being wasted today, as well as Sweden's full need of gypsum for the construction industry. And all of this, of course, is based on that we have an ongoing operation, and this is waste today, because we have a very low content of phosphorus in this. You would never mine this and find economy in such a thing by itself. The same goes for the REs. But when you combine all this and you take it on a circular approach with new technology, as well as introducing hydrogen into this, yes, this becomes viable, and we're now looking to have these kind of things and hope to have it operational going forward from 2026, 2027. This, of course, is a massive undertaking with extensive investments. I'm sorry for the figures here, looking 10 to 20 billion, that's 10 to 20 billion SEK, meaning 1 to 2 billion euros of investments each and every year for a 15 to 20 year period in order to construct all these new facilities. It also will mean massive investments in expansion of renewable energy, because fully built out, this will need 55 terawatt hours, which is more or less 1/3 of Sweden's present electricity production. But what you can see from this is also it provides a lot of job. At the same time as we do this, it will take just around 3,000 people to construct all these facilities going forward. And I think I will stop there when it comes to what we're doing, and just say a few things about the challenges we're facing going forward with this, and I'll keep that short. But first of all, competitively priced CO2-free electricity, and I can say we're less worried about the economy of this and more worried about the permits and the administration in order to be able to build transmission line, build new electricity production. Hydrogen, which is pre-industrial today, but where we see our suppliers and what they're planning, what they're looking through, is very promising for what this will look like in 2030, from 2026 and going forward. And then, of course, competence and people, and we shouldn't get more into this, but it all cooks down very much to that the real issues we are facing are much more about permits. Environmental permits, permits for electricity transformation, permits for electricity production. And if we should make all of this happen, I believe it's extremely important that we take a real value chain approach, because if you're going to transform heavy industry, there are a lot of things that matters to this. It's like a puzzle where every piece has to fit and has to be there for the whole picture to get there. But I think I'll stop there, Andrea, and then basically say that we see this as possible. This will become economically viable if we make sure there is a price on carbon and can get all our processes, permit processes, etc., and look at this as a value chain. This is a possible future today, going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. It's super interesting and also calls on the role of government and institutions in facilitating and accompanying this project. So I think it is a great segue to Daria's presentation. So Daria, obviously you are the Director General of an innovation funding agency, right? So let us have your thoughts about what this story teaches us, right? The floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, let me start in this end. We're living through a pandemic still that reminds us that we do have really serious vulnerabilities in the way we've currently organized global value chains related to not only steel, but food, pharmaceuticals, how we manage resources, planetary and human. And we know that there are inadequacies in how we prepare for and act in times of crisis. And therefore, we see now policy today, not least the new industrial strategy for Europe, aim to address these issues. So as we're seeing these recovery packages all over the world, massive public investments previously unheard of, now we have the opportunity of our lifetime to invest in the change we need. So this is really the right time to have real conversations about whether what we are doing right now is really enough and whether the strategies we put in place will drive the transformation we need or not. Because we are aware that we're working towards really hard deadlines. We need to remind ourselves that sometimes these deadlines are set by the planet. It doesn't care about our risk appetite, our innovation capacity, our willingness to invest. We must transform this society to function within planetary boundaries in a socially sustainable way. And any strategy, therefore, that doesn't take these scientific facts for granted is just not a viable strategy going forward. And that's why it's so encouraging to see now increasing numbers of companies and institutions acting on that fact. So for instance, ESG reporting is becoming more mainstream. Institutional investors, therefore, are moving their portfolios from climate risk to climate solutions. And there's a changing discourse on inequality and debt as part of that. It's super inspirational to now see the hybrid initiative. It's been around for a couple of years, but it's really making a difference now. It's leading the way in this monumental investment and effort to transform a fossil-free steel industry, and as we see, it transforms more industries as well. This type of industrial leadership is driven not only by the insight that transformation is necessary and urgent, but as we heard Nicholas describe, it also actually represents the biggest opportunity for value creation since the first industrial revolution. It's really viable business moving forward, because as we know, climate crisis is not going away, it's going to get worse, and policies will need to reflect that. So as this impact really goes beyond each separate industry, in fact, hybrid right now has already begun to transform traditional value chains into new ecosystems. It's across industry borders. It has also most certainly in Sweden changed the national political discussion, as well as the practical public-private collaboration around this necessary transformation. Because when looking at the practicalities, Nicholas mentioned it's a puzzle. So the connections and interdependencies between different policy areas such as infrastructure, research innovation, education, industrial policy, trade, local city development are becoming quite clear. And therefore, equally clear is the fact that we need to change how we work together to make the transformation of this magnitude reality. So for instance, what we see, as Nicholas mentioned, this opportunity for transformation is challenged by the way our regulatory frameworks are implemented in bureaucratic practice. To put it bluntly, when each regulatory process may seem effective and as best practice viewed one by one, but put together, these siloed approaches are often stacked linearly in time. They lack the transparency and the dialogue needed to make them come across as reliable, and the end result in total is timelines that make the absolute necessary impossible, and this needs to change. Another example, responsibilities and processes related to education. You only mentioned it briefly, Nicholas. Talent and traction and more. They're currently enforced by institutions, again siloed, used to working on a different scale, both in terms of impact and time, meaning they really struggle to truly address the competence demand, and therefore they risk out on missing on critical mission targets. And since much of this also actually involves local municipalities, it's really painful to see that the very scale of the opportunity presented for them challenge their capability to make use of them. So they simply don't have the skills or the resources needed for this type of new growth paradigm. So if we as government agencies then stick to our traditional and siloed mandates, we simply won't be of much help. And that's truly unacceptable. That the biggest obstacles towards the future we all need seem to be not lack of knowledge, not even technology, but existing work practices. We must not let our legacy structures be the reason that we fail to grasp this opportunity. Rather, we know that we need to ensure that our mindset, our practical leadership, as well as policy, moves away from a paradigm focusing on competitiveness, working in siloed, and producing siloed effectiveness to one that really accelerates transformation through every policy area. This needs shared directionality through missions that can guide us regardless of role or mandate. And they need to be supported by clear timelines based on scientific targets in relation to climate, where circularity, for instance, needs to be at the core of what drives the industrial transformation. We need governance structures that ensures a whole of government approach on these critical missions. And within each of our mandate as government agencies, we need to choose to actively work together. We need indicators that track transformation, not only traditional competitiveness. So for instance, as Director General, I would really welcome an EU-wide parallel to ESG reporting for us funding agencies, ensuring that every taxpayer cent is spent on research and innovation that really drive the innovation we do need, rather than spending them on incremental improvement of incumbent technologies and business models that we rather should be phasing out. We need to make much more of the innovation that comes from SMEs, perhaps especially those coming from deep tech companies within clean tech, advanced automation, and more. They struggle to scale today. We know a lot about what it takes, but we need to do it. We need to ensure that demand side for the new solutions be addressed together with supply. So a price on carbon dioxide is one, but I would also expect every government agency in Europe procuring solutions to really adhere to timelines for zero fossil footprint and actively level the playing field for all the new solutions that really make a difference in climate and in social sustainability at the same time. And we could be systematically use regulatory sandboxes to try out and address regulations and find the ones that don't hinder but rather pave way, and then commit to actually implementing those at scale. As we heard, investments into infrastructure is also critical. We know that green energy requires a mix of energy sources. We need to connect it to a dynamic mix of energy storage solutions. This requires massive investments now into energy infrastructure, but also into digital infrastructure. And all of this needs to work more decentralized than before. And that requires more research and innovation, because really we need edge technologies to make sure that we can have infrastructure and solutions that are both scalable, effective, secure, and sustainable. We're not on track on this one. So we need to also increase our ability to do this in a more coherent and effective way. Top-down approaches to some extent, but more also self-organization. Therefore, we as government agencies must also get better at using shared taxonomies, drive data interoperability in government just as in industry. So I know to some this may sound like a lot, perhaps even like risky business, but we know that the real risk is us doing too little too late, even tomorrow. And therefore, I'd like to step out for a last minute as my Director General role and finish off in this policy setting by speaking as a citizen. I grew up in these northern parts of Sweden, where this industrial transformation is now happening. And I wish that you could all go there, because it's so amazing to feel what transformation really means to a citizen. The hybrid initiative, together with industry-led initiative now that had already begun to transform these local communities, it changes how they act. It changes the way they think about themselves. Places that were just recently all but forgotten are now at center stage, bringing the future back. And that's what industrial policy, as well as any policy today, is really about. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Daria. This is a lot, but also even more amazing, because you are describing a situation where it is not money, as you were saying. It is not the traditional topics that we bring up, but it is actually government and its agility and its ability to accompany transformation and make it possible that stands between these plans and what and their actual realization and the impacts that they promise. And in turning to Andrew, I think this is even more surprising, because this story comes from Sweden, which in principle is supposed to be the country, one of the countries that more than the many other countries in the EU has already aligned, at least partially, the budget towards the SDGs, has already put the the different the four capitals, let's say, at the basis of public policy. So it's a country that is more enlightened, if you wish, in its orientation of public policy towards transformation. Is it really so complicated, and how do we achieve these paradigm shifts? I'm sure you will tell us something about the circular economy aspects of this. So I give you the floor, because I think you will add a very, very much needed perspective to this overall dialogue. So thank you very much for being with us, Andrew.
Thank you. And I wanted to start really by just talking a little bit about the circular economy before coming back and commenting on Nicholas's presentation and Daria's. And the reason I want to do that is that for many people, the way they think about the circular economy is as a waste agenda. It's really how we deal with waste post-use. But actually, the circular economy actually is a system solution and transformation framework, first and foremost. And it really aims to, by design, eliminate the idea of waste and pollution, not as an afterthought and as a waste agenda as such, but as a design agenda. And the attempt is to focus on maximizing the use and the value of products and materials and as assets, and to think about them in terms of the invested energy that has been embedded into them and is still available within them if they're kept in use. So we want to actually make sure that we not only by design eliminate waste and pollution, but we keep products and materials in use. And thirdly, we want to start to shift the thinking and say, not just about how do we reduce the harm of industry and the production of business, the byproducts and the industrial activity, but how do we actually shift to a regenerative thinking and a pro-nature thinking? So how do we incorporate those principles of regeneration and pro-nature into the design of the businesses, the products, the supply chains, the value chains, and the ecosystems? So in reality, the circular economy principles inform, the how-to of the transformation. It sets the principles for that. And the circular economy principles also and the circular economy solutions also play a really crucial part in the delivery of the climate agenda and the 1.5 degree targets. We know that we can get around 55% of the solution delivered for the 1.5 degree targets through alternative energies and energy efficiency, but the other 45% comes from the way in which we make and use things. So the circular economy is a much bigger idea than just waste management and the circularity of waste post-use. It's a systems thinking approach for designing a better model for and better forms of economic growth. So the shifting now to the role of business and the industrial solutions, these are absolutely crucial in providing the innovation for the scale solution and the execution of these solutions, not only in Europe but globally. Industrial innovation and scale execution of those solutions is absolutely crucial to delivering against the 1.5 degree targets and also many of the other SDGs. But it's not only the industrial innovation, as we heard from Nicholas, it's also how we combine this in a way with enabling policies and regulations that enable these solutions to actually get traction and to grow. So Nicholas talked, of a number of the challenges that that particular LKAB solution has challenges with, but you can think about this in terms of many other places. The definition of waste in the movement of cores for remanufacturing across borders, the way in which we think about planning at a built environment and the regulation around use of properties. These types of local planning barriers can be problematic, but there are many examples, and there's a very important sort of mission approach that needs to be adopted, and other people talk about this as well, emissions around specific material flows and specific value chains and ecosystems, and bringing the best of this innovation that is private sector driven in many ways, enabled by public sector policy and investment in R&D, but also in the regulations that enable these new markets to form and to be economically viable and effective. The other point I wanted to make was the importance of the digital transformation that we are seeing, and also referencing the Industry 5.0 narrative. It's really crucial that we actually give this digital transformation direction and purpose, and orient it towards the transformation that is informed by the principles of the circular economy and the other sustainability principles in the SDGs, and not allow it to actually become just a turbocharging and more efficient and way of actually accelerating the linear value extraction. What we need to ensure in policy and in the way in which we think about the application of technology and Industry 5.0 in particular is how that can be oriented towards the type of innovation and types of transformation that enable the circular economy, that enable a more distributed, diverse and inclusive economy, and are human-centric in the way that the idea has been talked about. But I would also argue that it not only needs to be human-centric, but it needs to be pro-nature. It needs to be regenerative in the way in which it's oriented as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Indeed, circularity cannot be an afterthought, as you say, and it has to be deeply embedded in the way we do things, in particular in government. And the role of government and public policy is essentially that of giving direction to innovation efforts, to align them also with the medium-term goals that we've given ourselves, right? Especially when we adopted the Sustainable Development Goals back in 2015, and now started mainstreaming them in our public policies. And also now when we look at things like resilience and reducing our dependencies on other parts of the world, all this comes together in a new transformational approach to the way in which we do we organize industry, and we transform industry through research and innovation. So we don't have a lot of time, and we know that Julien Guerrier has also been able to join us in the meanwhile. I will give the floor to Julien in 2 or 3 minutes. I just wanted to ask a quick question to the 3 panelists so that Julien also can listen to their reactions. So for Nicholas, we had actually a question come in through Slido on the issue of permits. And the question was whether the permits should be best handled at the EU, national or local level. And so I'd like you to comment on this and perhaps ask Daria, who's come from a more national, let's say, perspective, national policy perspective, to comment on this. If you could say, Nicholas, also something very quickly about the stability and the ability of LKAB to have a vision for the medium term, which also comes from the specific corporate organization and incentives that you have, right? The fact that, for example, the company is not listed, has a management that has a medium long-term view, that would be appreciated. I would ask perhaps Daria later to elaborate a little bit more on what can governments do to experiment with projects of this kind, and perhaps Andrew, I will ask him whether the EU, in his opinion, is doing enough. So I'll start with Nicholas.
Thank you, Andrea. First question there is should regulation be on European or national level? And
on permits in particular, yeah.
I think I would like to go back to one of the things Daria said, and I think that's the most important element in this, is that taking all our authorities, everybody in regulation needs to realize that we have to work in another way than we have done historically. That's more important than actually what kind of level we do this. I realize I have a background in government as well, and how difficult this kind of things is. And we have local government, we have many issues and it's about how can we find, and maybe there might be like some things are so big and important from a EU perspective that we need clear mission goals that should drive to, and for everybody to see that We have to really make this happen. And how should we do that? Your other question regarding our situation and LKAB as a state-owned company not being listed and how that influenced the possibility to make these long-term plans. Yes, being not being listed, not being and being state-owned might give us a little bit more room to really take a long-term view, put up a strategy, but that's also part of the mining business, where everything is investments are so big, take long time, that you need to have a very long-term view. Strategy, development, and discussions in the mining business are not 5 years. It's 25 years, where you have to today plan and make sure that you're going to be competitive in 15, 20 years time. Meaning that also for us means, of course, if you take it from a strict business perspective, sitting and looking at how should we be competitive 2040, yes, then we realize, if we cannot make sure that we are really a part of the solution to make sure the climate impact of our industry and the value chain we are part of, that's not going to happen. That's not going to fly. We have to have a strategy which is compliant with what we see will be needed on the market in these years. And Daria and everybody has touched upon this, that it's urgent. We need to do these changes now. And one of the biggest threats I see is that our system has not been built up. Our regulatory system has been built up on slow change, and now we need very fast change the years going forward. And that needs some real thinking and action and courage from a lot of authorities around Europe to happen.
Thanks a lot, Niklas. So Daria, long vision, fast change. Can government achieve that? And is experimentation one way of getting there?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, you can't. There's not a generic answer. But if you think about what we know from innovation management, so experimentation can be risk managed. You make small experiments and you make bigger experiments. And what we see when it comes to permits, for instance, it's not so much that it's on the wrong level. It's more like, what does the process actually look like? How transparent is it? What's the quality of the dialogue? When does the dialogue even start? Does it even start on time to have the quality enough? So is it always sequential, or can you have this dialogue in a richer and more coherent way? For instance, on the municipal level, you could work with many municipalities looking at similar issues at the same time, rather than one-on-one and reinventing the wheel. So it's a multifaceted question. One thing when it comes to levels, though, it's that I think it's very good to have like an effective for these kind of large-scale things. If it would require challenging some regulation or permits or something, some way of escalating. So the Swedish Constitution already supports experimentation. We know that because we had such legislation in place in the 80s. And now it's more like, what would this look like in a modern, in this time? So that there is now a committee put in place to be able to, take the more strategic initiatives from a national perspective and kind of have a government decision. Okay, we're going to provide support from all of these government institutions and agencies, and we're going to work on this problem, and they can have this experimentation space a bit outside of the ordinary, and then you can risk management and you can support it in specific ways. So I guess that what I'm saying is, from innovation management, we know a bit about how we can do this, that it's a lot about the quality in the process, and that we just need to start applying that across government on multiple levels.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
that's great. And I anticipate to Julian that we might be going with our discussion in the direction of conceptualizing massive innovation deals, meaning the ability for a business to really seek help and coordination in trying to navigate the different constraints that regulatory provisions at different levels of government present, and perhaps finding sustainable ways of complying with legislation. And so maybe we'll discuss this towards the end. And I want to ask Andrew his question. So if he thinks that the EU is doing enough to promote the circular economy, and more specifically, something that was asked to you via Slido, Andrew, whether the EU should achieve circular economy targets more through supporting innovation in the field or through reinforcing measures on waste export, or both? I don't know if you want to comment on this. It would be great, and then we'll move to Julien.
Well, firstly, I would say that Europe over the last several years has been, without question, the global leader on the topic of circular economy and has done a tremendous amount. But I think it's really clear to many people that we need to do much more, much faster. The challenges are enormous, and we need to actually recognize, as Nicholas said, and Dario as well, that we need to recognize a contemporary approach, a new approach for actually bringing together the industrial innovation and the public policy and regulations, and be mission oriented. And I think the advice that we would give the European Commission is to pick specific topics. So the mission approach is the right approach. We need to pick some sectors. If you look at fashion or textiles in Europe, we have almost zero return of post-use textiles into the value chain today. How do we get that to 50% flowing back into the fashion value chains by 2030? Setting really very bold ambitions, and then saying, how do we create the ecosystem, and how do we actually bring together the innovation to make that happen? That's it. To imagine that we could actually build an entirely new steel mill in Europe in 2021 is quite remarkable, really, given the pricing and the challenges associated with it. It demonstrates it's possible. We need more demonstrations. We need large scale demonstrations in plastics, fashion, and food. We need to make the food system much more regenerative by getting the food producers and supermarkets and orienting their purchasing practices and their design of their food products to be pro-regenerative, to be pro-nature. So it really is raising the ambition substantially, and then really recognizing we need a fundamentally different approach, a new approach. We need to prove it a number of times and then replicate and scale.
Thank you very much, Andrew. So I think Julien has heard enough by now that challenges the Commission also to realize this vision and to really deploy research and innovation in support of transformation. So Julien, I give the floor to you for your closing remarks. Feel free to echo, obviously, any of the things that you've heard from the three fantastic speakers that we've had in the past few minutes. Okay, thank you for joining us, and I give you the floor.
Thanks a lot, Andrea, and thanks a lot to all of you colleagues. Indeed, it's a lot of food for thought that I've just heard in a few minutes from you from the point of view of the Commission. When we look back at the year behind us, it's been really extraordinary, and this COVID crisis, as many crises before, has shown and exposed the limit of our ability to make predictions for the future in the context of very complex systems. So what is really necessary now is to strengthen our preparedness and to embark into a journey of systemic transformation. We need to build a robust system that keeps functioning in the face of new disruptions, including major ones, a system which remains also within the planetary boundaries, as you say in the ESIR group, and leaves no one behind. In the post-COVID world and in the recovery phase, research and innovation will be critical to make or break our future and to support the green and digital transitions. So in line with the motto of your group, protect, prepare, and transform Europe, we will need to rely on research and innovation to create greater resilience by design, not by disaster, and to make sure that we have a truly transformative R&I policy. So your work in ESIR is really crucial to develop that policy and to contribute to the twin transitions. For us, this transformative R&I policy builds on 4 elements, which I've heard from you in the past few minutes. The first is directionality. We need to mobilize resources to introduce reforms and to steer innovation through regulation. The second is coherence and alignment. We need to have a whole of government approach and mobilize all sectoral policies, industrial, education, trade, regional employment, across all levels of government, local, regional, national, and global, to pursue our aims. The third element is societal engagement, and we've seen that in particular in the EU missions that we are developing with Horizon and beyond, where we are trying to innovate through new citizen engagement methods and a new way of conducting public policy for the citizens and with the citizens. And the fourth one is experimentation. Daria mentioned it. The emergence of new technologies, practices, and business models requires really a more systematic approach and a more systematic application of policy experimentation to deliver new evidence on the effects of policies and policy instruments. So that's what we want to pursue, a flexible, experimentation-driven innovation policy. Research and innovation will be at the center of our drive to develop an industry that is human-centric, resilient, and sustainable. So we are expecting a lot from your work on the concept of Industry 5.0, which is extremely timely. And I look forward to working together with you on how Europe can best achieve a sustainable and inclusive recovery, and how research and innovation will underpin it and be at the center of it. Thanks a lot to you, Professor, dear Andrea, and thanks to all of you.
Thanks a lot, Julien. We are on a journey, right? And the journey in which the ESIR group will continue to push and encourage the Commission to be bold and courageous in really pave the way for this ambitious plan and for transformation over time. So I'd like to thank all the attendees, and I also in particular like to thank our speakers who've been extremely thoughtful and really gave us very complementary perspectives. So you see them on screen right now, Nicholas, Daria, Andrew, and lastly, Julien. Thank you very much for joining us on this session. Stay tuned for the R&I days and also for the continuation of the work of ESIR. We will invite more case studies and continue our reflection on what policy can do to stimulate meaningful, massive, impactful